Israel's political leadership has taken a major step towards shaping the country's financial priorities for the coming year, approving the 2026 state budget after days of intense negotiations, internal pressure, and one of the most turbulent political periods the country has faced in more than a decade. The decision, announced by the Prime Minister's office, marks the beginning of what is expected to be a long and difficult battle in Parliament, where deep divisions inside the governing coalition have repeatedly threatened the durability of the current administration. The heart of this budget and the headline dominating public and political discourse is defence. In the newly approved version, the government has allocated 112 billion shekels, approximately $35 billion, to national defence. That represents a substantial increase from earlier drafts, which had set defence spending at 90 billion shekels. For a country navigating the aftermath of simultaneous conflicts, ongoing ceasefire arrangements, and profound societal trauma, the shift signals a strategic choice to prioritise military readiness and internal security above nearly every other government expenditure. Officials confirmed that this version of the budget will now be sent to Israel's parliament for the first round of voting. Under Israeli law, the government must pass the full budget by March 2026. Failure to do so automatically triggers a national election. This deadline looms over every stage of the budget process, raising the stakes at a moment when Israel's political blocs remain fractured over the future of the war in Gaza, the terms of the ceasefire agreements, military service exemptions for ultra-Orthodox communities, and the broader question of how Israel's society should reorganise after 2 years of almost continuous conflict. Ministers had entered the marathon budget session with the expectation that defence expenditures would climb significantly, reflecting the enormous financial strain of Israel's recent military operations. The war in Gaza alone consumed immense economic resources, and combined with the parallel confrontation with Hezbollah along the country's northern border, Israel's defence spending surged to $31 billion in 2024. Even with the ceasefire agreements that have eased immediate battlefield pressures, military planners argue that Israel must rebuild stockpiles, reinforce readiness, and support reservists who have borne an exceptional burden throughout the conflict. Defence Minister Israel Katz, who has played a central role in coordinating the new funding structure, emphasised that the budget reflects not only past expenses but future preparedness. His office released a statement underscoring the need for robust investment in the Israeli Defence Forces to prevent further erosion of capacity. He said, "We will continue to act decisively to reinforce the IDF and to fully address the needs of the fighters and to reduce the burden on reservists in order to ensure the security of the State of Israel on every front." The comment encapsulated the political and emotional weight behind this. Years' defence allocation, a commitment to reassure soldiers, citizens and allies that Israel intends to remain strong and strategically unshaken despite the exhaustion of prolonged warfare. Within the cabinet meeting, ministers debated the scale of the defence increase and the pressure it places on other government sectors. Israel's economy has slowed since the start of the Gaza war. Labour participation has shifted dramatically due to long-term reserve call-ups, and domestic political pressure continues to rise as families call for economic relief. Yet government officials insist the country cannot afford to reduce defence spending at a time when strategic vulnerabilities are still under assessment and the long-term consequences of the ceasefires remain uncertain. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich framed the budget as both a national security necessity and an economic investment in recovery. His office released figures comparing the new allocation to Israel's defence budget in the year before the war began. According to those numbers, the 2026 defence package represents a staggering increase of 47 billion shekels compared with 2023. Smotrich argued that the budget is not solely about military expansion, but about stabilising Israel's future. He said, "We are allocating a huge budget to strengthen the army this year, but also one that allows us to return the State of Israel to a path of growth and relief for citizens." His remarks signalled an effort to position the larger defence expenditure not as an unaffordable burden, but as the foundation for long-term national resilience. For many Israelis, however, the debate goes beyond spreadsheets. The country has undergone a profound psychological and social transformation since the October 2023 attacks that reignited a devastating war in Gaza. The scale of the conflict reshaped families, workplaces, and political alliances. Over the past 2 years, divisions have deepened inside the ruling coalition, with partners breaking away or publicly clashing over ceasefire arrangements, military strategy, and exemptions for ultra-Orthodox men from mandatory military service. The issue of conscription has become an explosive point of tension, with critics arguing that the burden of war is being carried disproportionately by secular and national religious communities, while ultra-Orthodox leaders maintain that Torah study is essential to national survival. These unresolved disputes continue to shape political negotiations, casting uncertainty over whether the budget can survive the parliamentary process without triggering yet another election. Israel has experienced nearly continuous political instability over the last several years, with repeated elections and shifting coalition alliances making long-term governance challenging. Analysts warn that unless major compromises are reached, the budget's path through the Knesset will be far from straightforward. Yet the government faces another challenge beyond internal politics: public trust. Israel's military and intelligence institutions were severely criticised following the early failures of the 2023-24 conflict, and parts of the public remain anxious about the country's long-term security direction. The new defence budget is intended, in part, to restore confidence by demonstrating the government's readiness to rebuild and strengthen the military. But while support for a strong defence remains high, many Israelis also demand accountability, efficiency and transparency, particularly when billions of shekels are being redirected toward the armed forces during a period of economic strain. The ceasefires with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon have provided a window of calm, but government officials admit that the situation remains delicate. The ceasefire agreements did not resolve the underlying disputes, and the region's broader geopolitical landscape remains volatile. Israeli defence planners argue that the country must prepare for the possibility that fighting could resume, especially in areas where armed groups maintain active capabilities. This strategic uncertainty has reinforced the argument for increased defence funding, as contingencies must be planned across multiple fronts, not just in Gaza or the north. Inside Parliament, lawmakers from both the governing coalition and the opposition have already begun preparing their positions. Members of the coalition argue that the new defence budget is essential, citing lessons learned during the conflict, vulnerabilities in reserve mobilisation systems, and the need to modernise the armed forces. They highlight the constraints created by strained supply chains, the cost of replenishing ammunition, and the rising price of advanced defence technologies. They also emphasise that defence spending has spillover effects, supporting Israel's domestic defence industries and creating jobs in high-skilled sectors. Opposition leaders, however, are expected to challenge the scale of the increase, questioning whether the budget places too much emphasis on military spending at the expense of domestic welfare, education, healthcare and economic recovery. They warn that Israel's long-term strength depends not only on military capability, but on social cohesion, economic opportunity and trust between communities. Some opposition lawmakers have signalled that they will demand clearer oversight mechanisms to ensure that funds are used efficiently and do not disappear into bloated procurement pipelines or politically motivated allocations. Despite these divisions, many political analysts note that Israel's historical precedent shows that defence budgets, especially in the aftermath of major conflicts, often secure broad support in Parliament. The difference this time is the intensity of political polarisation and the proximity of the March deadline. The question is not simply whether the budget will pass, but whether the ruling coalition can navigate internal fractures long enough to avoid triggering an early election. The economic dimension adds further complexity. Israel's finance ministry has faced growing pressure to balance defence needs with the broader economic recovery. After multiple years of crisis-driven spending, the government must grapple with inflation concerns, labour shortages and the high cost of living that has burdened families since the beginning of the conflict. businesses, particularly in Israel's technology sector, have called for greater economic stability and predictability, warning that prolonged uncertainty could undermine investment at a critical time. At the same time, the defense industry views the budget as both a challenge and an opportunity. The scale of Israel's new military spending could accelerate innovation in missile defense, cybersecurity, intelligence systems, unmanned platforms, and advanced weaponry sectors where Israeli companies already have significant global influence. However, industry leaders also caution that the military's needs have changed dramatically in recent years, requiring reforms in procurement strategy and greater cooperation with international partners. Societally, the new defence budget has prompted renewed discussions about the burden of reserve service. During the Gaza and Lebanon conflicts, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were called up for extended periods, often leaving jobs, businesses and families under extreme pressure. The government has acknowledged these strains and has pledged to reduce the burden on reservists through expanded support, improved benefits and more efficient mobilisation. Many reservists, however, argue that meaningful reforms must accompany financial investment, including clearer deployment guidelines, better training and improvements in mental health support. Public reactions to the budget announcement have been mixed. Some see the expanded defence spending as an unavoidable consequence of Israel's security environment. Others fear that the emphasis on military expenditure will widen social and economic inequalities at a moment when the country needs healing and reconstruction. Still, others question whether the ceasefire agreements are strong enough to justify moving away from emergency wartime budgets. Across the political and social spectrum, one theme remains constant: the understanding that Israel is entering a new phase defined by post-war uncertainty, shifting regional dynamics, and profound domestic transitions. The 2026 budget, especially its defence component, is not merely a financial document, but a statement about how Israel intends to navigate this next chapter. As the budget advances to Parliament, lawmakers will face the task of shaping a financial blueprint that balances security, economic recovery and social stability. Whether the current coalition can hold together long enough to deliver that blueprint remains an open question. What is certain is that the stakes have rarely been higher, and the decisions made in the coming weeks will help define Israel's strategic direction for years to come.